complicated, you know, man. It's like a damn Rubik's Cube, man. You like talking about blue, red, man, then you get to one side, and like messed up.
All right, guys. Welcome to the Jay Burden Show. Before I have American Populist on, I'd like to announce that I said before that the show was sponsored and we got a little ad together. So because it's the first time we're going to show the ad, I thought I'd premiere it like this instead of just inserting into the middle of the video. But anyway, here's the ad I got cut together for Axios. If you share my lack of faith in our health system, you should take control of your well-being. Building resilience and maintaining good health for the long term needs to be a priority. Axios Remote Fitness Coaching offers one-stop expert advice on training, diet, and lifestyle. You can purchase customized workout plans for strength training or structured exercise. If you're serious about maximizing your potential, you can book time with a coach or customize your routine and get video feedback on your performance. I know the owner, and he's one of us. Visit Axios and support those who support the show. Follow the link in the description to become a man of action with Axios. No one blames you for being weak, but it's your fault if you stay that way. All right, American Populist. Welcome back to the Jay Burden Show. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Glad to be back on your show, man. It's been a while.
Yeah, I know. It's literally everyone in our spheres who's talked to me in the last couple of weeks known that I've been incredibly difficult to nail down. Obviously, I've started a new job and a wedding, and trying to record 4 times a week. It's been a little bit tough, but I'm glad to have you back on.
Oh, it's understandable, man. College work has really gotten in the way of me making as much content as I would like on my channel.
Oh yeah, tell me about it, man. I've recently started, or I guess I'm through my first one with professional exams, taking tests and getting certifications, and I'm really out of practice with studying. It's amazing how much of your brain just gets completely overrun by it.
No, yeah, you get very used to it. After you just get reprogrammed, studying late at night.
Let me tell you, once you get out of it, at least if you're like me, you never want to go back. Like people are like, "Oh, are you talking about going back to grad school?" No, never. You'll never get me back. And this is probably the closest I'll ever get to going back to college.
No, I feel the same way, especially considering how many of these giant whales populate the colleges. There's like not even a hedonistic reason to go back if you're into that sort of thing. Like it's just that last vestige of the accreditation system that keeps you going there for me. Otherwise, I wouldn't go at all.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Here's the funny thing: in my current job, I don't even need a college degree technically. If you can pass the test, you can get in. And there's a part of me that's like, I should have just done this when I was 18. I could have done it. I could have been working. I could have been actually like a productive member of society instead of sitting in school for 4 years. But that's probably neither here nor there. So if you want to just get into it, what have you been talking about recently? I've not been keeping up with really anyone's content, and so I kind of scrolled back through who you were talking to. But is there anything that you've done recently that you're really like proud of or you thought was interesting?
Yes, I really enjoyed my conversation with prudentials I recently had on my channel about geopolitics. We got into some really interesting stuff. I got him finally back on that after his hiatus. I thought that was a very good conversation, as well as my one with Yiz, where he talked about the go free method and why using naughty words isn't a good strategy. It just keeps you in the cycle of defeat. So I thought that was a really good conversation as well, because it's like, why are we going to continue to use strategies that obviously aren't going to work? It doesn't matter if it's true or based. It's it's about like winning ultimately, right? That's what we're trying to do here, not LARP. That's not going to achieve anything in the long run. So I think that conversation is very prudent on that topic.
That's fair enough. I think that this is something that it's really easy to point out, especially in like the libertarian types. About wanting to be like the most principled, the most correct person and never winning anything, and they're not important. And so I think that that's something that we should probably take seriously.
I felt the same way, although I can't help but view libertarians now as it's basically feminism for men. I think Mr. Patriarch put it very well in his video about that. Like, it literally is just feminism for men who are probably on the spectrum, if we're being honest with ourselves. You want to come up with some logical reason for why Austrian economics, and social liberalism can work if you just implement it this way. If we just tried it this way, you wouldn't have the gay race communism that we have now.
Well, yeah, it is very much it's a desire to systematize a world that's not really a mathematical model. And you see why it appeals to essentially like mildly autistic 135 IQ, white and Asian programmers, right? Because essentially it views, society as a mathematical equation with only one variable, and it's freedom. And if you just maximize that variable, step 1, freedom, step 2, question mark, step 3, ANCAP utopia. And and obviously like the person I think who's done the best at deconstructing this is Pete, right? Like he's, essentially just taking a wrecking ball to those people. But it's interesting to kind of see that tendency, of, wanting to be the most ideologically consistent, the most ideologically correct, no matter what, the one to essentially like become a perfect persecuted person, and okay, fair enough, maybe you're right, but if you never win, it doesn't really functionally matter.
No, there is this archetype in our sphere of the perfect martyr. That is the most pure, the most ideologically consistent, that takes everything to its logical conclusions, doesn't compromise on things, but lives in a system that's totally dominated by the enemies. It can't understand that like you have to be pragmatic here, and we kind of have to adopt different strategies. We don't live in that same society anymore. That you can actually use that strategy to wake people up, quote unquote, or wake the normies up. It's not feasible. We don't live in that society, and so being a perfect martyr, while in principle is extremely noble thing to do, but like it's not going to really achieve anything in the current system, I would say, at the moment.
Well, and there's also something to be said about the fact of like, well, what is the purpose of self-sacrifice, right? Like, what is the point of giving something up? And if there's something to be gained in it, right? Like if you are, the one person in your, in your tribe, to use a, simplistic analogy, who, stays behind to hold off, the people chasing you. And in doing so, your life is lost, but you kind of, you secure survival, for a larger group of your, tribe. Fair enough. That's a good trade. Obviously there's a political analogy to that. But to be honest, if you're just essentially like throwing yourself, in front of a railway engine and just getting mulch, turned to grape jelly, and in no way appreciably slowing down the railway, it's like, well, okay, what have you done? You've taken, 1 unit of our guys and thrown them away. You've ruined your own life. And for what? You accomplished nothing. You maybe at best are a niche internet martyr, but even then, like, what does that really accomplish? And so while I fully understand why people are constantly trying to push, like, hey, like do things IRL, not just political things, but, just like be around people, like put your face to your ideas. I understand that, but the problem is it's like, that's difficult to do when you're a guy with, trying to get a start in life and who's very susceptible to just being, ruined, so to speak.
No, yeah, the system is very good at fishing us out that way. When you when you make yourself a target, like you shouldn't be surprised when the enemy like snipes you down, and like they have so many means of doing this. So face doxing, okay, in principle, yes, it's a good thing not to be an anon. I agree with that. However, not everybody should be doing that. That's a bad thing, because what it does is it presents a larger target for the enemy to hit. You want to present a smallest target as possible for the enemy, so it makes them harder to hit anything, score any critical damage. Because you're gonna have to weigh pros and cons of this on a large scale. You can't just use blanket statements like the Lobster tried to do recently, where everyone needs to like face dox themselves so they don't be mean or something. And that's gonna show the left that they've gone too far or something like that. Like, which won't achieve anything in the end. It only helps our enemies achieve more stronger, solidified victory over us.
Yeah, and honestly, I think it's why, in a weird way, the internet isn't necessarily good for us, because the the incentive of especially places like Telegram and Twitter to a lesser degree is to be the most eye-catching and the most extreme. And obviously, there are certain being extreme is neither a vice nor a virtue. It kind of depends on the situation. And obviously we can all think of issues that we're extremists on. But being essentially like a zealot, being this kind of like you know holy warrior is it's not particularly useful when that instinct is turned towards people who are very, very close to you. Who are pretty much like 98% the same as you are. And I think that it's well worth considering what actually starts these fights. And obviously, there's been some drama that I'm not going to get into, that I'm not going to, directly comment. I don't really care about it. But, when someone acts like that, when someone's constantly like stirring the pot, trying to start things and trying to antagonize groups of people who are being productive, don't even put, gas on the fire, just contain them. Obviously like the symbol of my channel is a beaver, right? And so there's been kind of a meme going around like, yeah, build the dam, like build a wall, keep them out. Because to be honest, like we're not in a position where we can afford to make enemies. Enemies are expensive, as Dave is wont to say. And starting fights with people who, are productive and are, kind of like pointing towards common ends is just not useful. So the people I think of specifically like this, there are people who I don't talk to, but I think are interesting. Like I don't agree with BAP on everything, but I don't listen to BAP that much. I think he's has an interesting pattern of thought, but I don't spend my time tearing him down. Like a lot of, kind of like autistic, trad Cath. I don't mean to insult Catholics. I mean that in the derogatory internet sense. Like that's just stupid. It's a waste of time. Or even people like, Evelyn and Scrump, who I obviously disagree with on a lot of things, but they do really good work. And like there's no two ways about that. They do good work. They're productive and they don't start stuff. So why would I, even though I probably disagree with them on, any number of things. And so to me, at least, it's the way the internet works, of incentivizing these kind of, even aside from any direct action, that's just poison. And so, I think that what we need to do is basically like just kind of man up about it and get out of this like, schoolroom squabbling. But anyway, AP, I've been monologuing. I completely like walked all over you there.
No, it's fine. I think we should look at this as like it's a very simple calculation. Are they an asset or are they a liability? If they're a liability, cut them out. Don't give them more steam. Don't pump them up with fights and trauma. That's just going to give them more clout and attention, which is what they want. Just remove them from group chats, disassociate with them, and encourage people not to partake in whatever they're doing. And like that doesn't mean everybody, one of these people is going to be perfect, but are they helping? Are they helping us, or are they an asset to the enemy? So a person like David French is obviously on the side of the enemy. A person like Evelyn, wow, we do things we disagree on as an asset because they're not fundamentally causing backdoor drama, e-fights, and are they helping to advance the cause, or are they helping to reverse the cause? Is the way you need to look at people in a very simple way, because it is really that simple.
Well, and one of the other things that I've been generally thinking about, right, is that I'm not necessarily like an intellectual leader in this, right? None of my ideas are my own, really. I'm a synthesizer of more intelligent people, and I kind of am a nexus point, right? I facilitate conversations. So I'm not saying this in the sense that I'm some kind of like thought leader, far from it. But I think there's also something to be said with grading the validity of someone's criticism with how much work they put in. Because if someone is actually trying, and it doesn't necessarily have to be content creation, but if someone is like doing something productive and they have criticism, I feel like that's worth more. That is someone who has kind of shown that they are, in addition to just pure criticism, to just a culture of critique where they're willing to offer something as well. And that doesn't mean that they're right, doesn't mean that they're immune from criticism. But there is this kind of like pure disembodied way of acting on the internet, of being, just a being of pure critique. And this is a weird digression, but American Populist, did you ever watch, and this might be a little early for you, but did you ever watch like the Channel Awesome stuff, like the really early YouTube movie reviewers?
I don't think so, but I might have.
Incredibly cringe. This is, people like, that's actually where Lindsay Ellis got her start, but the people like Nostalgia Critic and, people in his sphere, Angry Joe actually got a start in that same era. But what's interesting is that this was kind of the first round of quote unquote like YouTube criticism. And a lot of these people kind of started to, to have their own farts to a certain degree. And they thought, like, oh, we as critics, we understand this media of, making movies so well, we can do it on our own. So they crowdfunded movies and they made, these kind of like the first round of like YouTuber films, and they're awful, like infamously so. Because again, it's the idea that, criticism in itself teaches you how to do something. This idea that you can build something out of a culture of pure critique. And obviously, there are critics I, enjoy to this day. Obviously, if you followed my stuff for a while, I have a emotional attachment to the guys at Red Letter Media. But, nonetheless, right, I do think that, when there is kind of drama or when there's negativity, it's worth saying like, well, why does your opinion matter? And obviously, look, like I have plenty of friends, genuinely, like even people in chat who don't publicly post anything. I am not saying you have to, but if it's just some random person you don't know, like why does their criticism hold water? At least is my point. If they've given no like positive goodwill on the front end.
No, I think I would agree with you. They have no stake in the conversation if they're not actually producing something or contributing to the cause in any way. Otherwise, they're just like a mindless, like, that meme, the two people mindlessly screeching about something, basically. That's just what it is, except fight on the internet with these comments and things.
My favorite one, it's a version of the same idea, right? It's that image from The Simpsons of two monkeys fighting and everyone's, betting on the fight. It's basically just a disaster. But anyway, carry on, man.
Ultimately, the outcome of the screechy match is pointless because they're just a nobody. That's not going to matter. They're not somebody who you have to actually pay attention to because they're not contributing something that would be worth to critique, actually, in the truest sense.
And my point in this is not that I'm some, intellectual leader. Far from it. That's actually the polar opposite of my point. My point is that if someone's only contribution to a conversation is just pure critique, it's just pure, essentially like this kind of like shit flinging we've seen a lot of, then I think that those are people who should be kind of cordoned off and contained. Like if we're actually trying to build something, we're actually trying to do something positive, then we need to incentivize positive behavior. And it's difficult because so much of the internet is essentially an absolute, disaster. It's designed to make you angry. And obviously there's some, kind of like righteous anger that's useful, and obviously, there's been a lot of, dialogue recently with, the Scott Adams, how should I say this delicately for the sake of YouTube, the Scott Adams dialectic, I'll put it that way. That these things which do make people mad are probably useful. They produce a reaction towards a point being made. But just like pure rage bait or trying to kind of like angle different internet personalities against each other is pointless. And Dave, the distributist, mentioned this when he was talking about, the internet a few weeks back. I think that the person he interacted with was President Sunday. This person who essentially only existed to kind of create these internet firestorms, ruin someone's life. And it's easy to get sucked into it. And so to me, at least, I think that like we need to be more proactive about essentially just getting rid of these people, not interacting with them, because they do, without oxygen, they'll just sputter out.
Yeah, it's like trying to it's a massive overreaction. It's like trying to put out a cup that's on fire with a fire truck. It's really not that big of a deal. It's not worth the effort or attention. Because again, we only have so much effort and kind of intellectual space as human beings, and especially the size of the movement that we are, to be wasting time having intellectual arguments about who's right in this fight, and his critique about who's right, on this issue, to be having pointless conversations the American question is one of these that academic agent likes to indulge in, which is a pointless question because we both agree that we're both fighting the same enemy here. So having an argument about, well, it originated from America, so therefore Americans are the enemy too, just creates pointless division and needless drama that doesn't serve anybody. And it's kind of part of the YouTube cycle where you have to create drama and views to run a channel, which is understandable, but you really shouldn't bring that if you're trying to run a successful movement and dissident intellectual space.
Well, I think it brings up an important point, which is, what is the purpose of being on the internet? Because the algorithmic purpose, right, the social media purpose is to gather clout, right, to get n+1 retweets, to get n+1 concurrent viewers on a live stream, to get people to send super chats, which they can do either through Entropy or through YouTube directly, of course. But nonetheless, right, the way that the platform is set up is designed to incentivize that. But that is not conducive to building a movement. And so I think we have to be pretty honest about, well, what do we want to do? Do we want to build something which involves, essentially moving off the internet, using the internet as a Rolodex, as a phone book to kind of, promote IRL, endeavors? Or are we trying to, quote unquote, win the internet? And the problem with that is that, to be honest, it's way easier for our enemies, quote unquote, to win the internet, right? If you have, hours and hours and hours of, socialists streaming on Twitch, with full, YouTube optimization, with slick merch stores, with all of this, they can give you more dopamine. They're going to win. And this is the thing about evil and corruption, is it tends to be attractive. It's kind of darkly seductive. And again, I think that there's this weird, fallback towards the marketplace of ideas, which, if we can just be extra convincing, we'll win. And I think that's fundamentally not true. And so that does kind of bring into question, well, why are we, here posting?
No, I agree with that. That is an important question. I think some of these more intellectuals, like Dave has brought up, the internet is a tool. It's not the movement. It shouldn't be a replacement for real life organizing an event, because then you're just cutting yourself off from actual genuine interaction and people gathering, which probably in the long run produces more valuable things than everything we produce on the internet ever will combined. So it's just a waste. Yes, it's a useful tool, but we should recognize that it's a tool. It's not everything in terms of what we need to actually make ground or convince the people in the elite to defect, so to speak, to our cause, or at least become more susceptible to our ideas. We'll say that.
So Blackwater in chat brings up something. I don't know. I think we win every uncensored debate. You're probably right. And that's not necessarily what I'm talking about. One is that I think that the likelihood of there being uncensored debates for us to win again in the near future is almost nil. To be honest, none of these people want to talk to us. The closest you've got is Benjamin Boyce, who, while, an interesting guy, is certainly not, a regime approved leftoid. But also what I'm saying is that in the race of kind of digital dopamine, this isn't what wins. What wins is essentially, the kind of degeneracy you see making the rounds on, on like retards of TikTok every once in a while or something like that. Like it truly is lowest common denominator. And I think also that it's easier to slide down into that than it is to bring someone up, if that makes any sense. Maybe that's not super cogent. But anyway, AP, I interrupted you there.
No, I think that makes perfect sense. I mean, like, it's easier pushing something down the slope than it is pushing something up the slope, because you're running up against the forces of entropy there.
And
So it
that's
just is intrinsically harder to do.
And that's exactly the point that that Moldbug made, is that really, like, this is the phrase the left and right isn't really super accurate. I mean, it's colloquially helpful, but I kind of adopt Moldbug's metric, which is like pro or anti-order. And being anti-order is it's much easier. It's easier to break something than it is to build it back up. And you're constantly fighting against that, kind of like slow degradation. And to be honest, at least on a civilizational level, it wins eventually. There's no two ways around that. And obviously, like you should fight against the, the dying of the light and all that. I'm not saying it's all pointless, but this is not an equal contest. This is not dualistic. And I think that's the problem with the metaphor of the left and right, is that it frames this as a contest between equals. And we are not equal. We are not equal in power level, and who knows, maybe we can fix that. I hope we can. I think that it's conceivable we could, but we currently are not equal power-wise at all. And don't forget that, because that's important. But also,
like, honestly, the metaphor I would like to use for that is that we're basically Iraq, in like 1991, where we think we can actually make offensive. Meanwhile, the left controls all institutions, the world's most powerful military, and the most powerful global corporations that have ever existed on the face of the earth. And like, he just continuously gets wiped out war after war, and like gets regime change. Like, it's not even comparable, the power differential here that we face. So the people who say that it's equal are just flat out wrong.
Also, we're not equal in substance, right? So again, like I said about order and chaos, or order and entropy, these are not the same type of force. And I think that the dualistic model, which is really a product of kind of like duopoly party politics, it's it's just completely, I don't know, we're being kind of hamstrung by that. And I'm not trying to make some kind of like big brained, like I'm smarter than everyone point, because that's not my intention at all. My point is that essentially that we've adopted many of the premises of our enemies, and in much the same way you see conservatives routinely being hamstrung by sticking to 90s liberalism or 60s liberalism. I think that by framing it as the left and right as these kind of like equal and opposite forces, we kind of delude ourselves and play into this model to circle back around to what we were talking about first, where we could if we throw ourselves in front of the train, well, we're almost equal in power. So instead of a man walking out in front of a train, well, it's two trains running into each other. And that's a much more destructive, a much more significant event. And I think that that's an idea that's been deliberately cultivated, in the way media coverage is on any issue. There's this constant threat of, the backwoods, hick Ubermensch who are going to take over America in January 7th. And I think that that's just, pure fantasy. But I don't know. I've been talking for a while. I've taken up all the air in the room.
No, I agree with you in the fantasy. Like, it sort of serves like to help keep the left invigorated, right? Because the way that the left finally runs their side is they keep them constantly hyped up on these issues that hyper issues get them care, and they need an enemy to make them feel like they're the underdogs, even though the reality is completely different. But they need to tell themselves that fundamental narrative that they're the underdogs is still true. So that's why the Republican Party and the dissident opposition is allowed, but never allowed to truly change the system at a fundamental level, because it serves the system to have these conservatives. It's perfect. You want them there for the propaganda and to say, look, the fascist is right there. And if you lose concentration on climate change and racism, 1950s is going to be right around the corner. One vote away, essentially.
One of the things that I think is interesting is I think that they simultaneously know that they're in charge, and they know they won't be in charge forever. And I think that so much of this paranoia is them kind of essentially worried about when, the worried about when, Napoleon comes, or worried about when the next big thing comes. And I think that the reason that they're constantly like searching out for any kind of challenge to their power is that they're not secure in it. They feel like that things are kind of slipping out of their control. And I think that one of the reasons I'm not black-pilled is I genuinely don't think that, the elites can pull off the panopticon that they seem to want to. This kind of like vision of the cradle to grave surveillance state. I don't think it's possible. That it wouldn't have been possible even with like the best, most efficient workers in the world. But I think that a lot of the romanticization you see around AI is this idea that, well, we can, dilute the power base of the people below us, with economics, with, immigration, by kind of like sabotaging their cultural capital. And, normally those people would be, the skilled technicians, the soldiers, the lawyers, the kind of like middle layer of society. But we'll cover that up with AI. AI will do all of that. And I just genuinely don't think that will work. I think that the deconstruction that they've, dumped on society, which enabled them, to achieve a great amount of power, it's starting to eat away at the important parts. And I mean, obviously it's already eaten away at important parts, but I mean that it started to eat away at things that affect, their ability to, to control things. And at least to me, it's like, I think that they know it, and it's why they seem so worried. I think that they feel insecure.
No, this is a common thing you'll see with regimes that are kind of losing grip with reality. Is that they increasingly have to have more and more ideologically pure people to keep power. So they have to constantly go lower and lower on the quality spectrum. So all you get is just absolute bottom of the barrel people put in positions of power that they never would be in a sane society, but they have to, because those are the most loyal to the regime and narrative, and that they still believe in the religion of progressivism. They're still true believers, and you need those people to keep the system going. However, there is a cost to that, because that means you're not able to run these immensely complex systems of government, like the federal bureaucracy, the State Department, the systems of surveillance, and like a coherent narrative, which they're losing the ability to with the decline in mainstream media and like kind of the growth of alternative sources, which is a big deal, because before that, there was only one source of a narrative, and it was the three big news networks, all controlled by the people in the bureaucracy. However, now that's different, because you can actually get a real perspective. That isn't your only option anymore. And like, I feel like the regime wouldn't be able to do something like what they did in the 90s, like with turning the narrative around on like Ruby Ridge and Waco. Like those people that would be able to do that, to run those sort of narrative machines, just like aren't going to exist anymore, because they're the wrong skin color. And the narrative must continue on with the march of progress.
Because I think, and this is an open question, which is whether they have the ability to ease off the throttle. And I think that my expectation was that Joe Biden would ease off the throttle. That Joe Biden would go back to being kind of a 90s, mildly racist boomer Democrat, and just kind of let people alone. which would have at least enabled, some people to re-enter the fold, so to speak. Because again, to me, the thing there's just no two ways around is that they kind of need, they need white guys from the Southeast to sign up for frontline combat roles. And to be honest, I mean, the cratering of U.S. recruiting is a well-known news story. They're offering $30,000 bonuses, massive cash bonuses, essentially probably a year's wages for an E1 or something, to sign on, and they still can't meet it. Essentially because that kind of like core group of especially like frontline people were just not doing it. And the smart play would have been to ease off, let those people have a bone or two, let them back into the fold, maybe make patriotism and, country music and all of these things in some way, acceptable, and kind of let them back in, and who knows, that still may be coming. Obviously we're in kind of a cold war right now. And who knows, maybe if it goes hot, we'll see a lot more, Dixie Chicks and, and Judd Apatow movies. But to me, that's kind of an open question. And it's an interesting one because if they can't, it either means that they're completely ideologically possessed, or they're not in control, or they're not able to essentially hold the activist base, their weapon. They're not allowed to keep it in the sheath anymore. It's got a mind of its own. The tiger is, they have it by the tail, but they can't really, let go of it, so to speak. And so who knows? They've done it before, and obviously you never go back. But to me, I don't know if I've seen them do it. Maybe they will, but to me at least, I've seen no signs, because you would assume that Biden would have been the time. But obviously, that man is going full steam ahead with the progressive agenda. But these are, again, not particularly original thoughts, but ones I've been having.
I lean towards the view that they're ideologically captured by their own lies at this point, because if you tell a lie often enough, and so you say to yourself, it will become true. And these people control the levers of power itself. So, and they're surrounded by the narrative at every single level, from their aides, the departments, the media, big corporations. Everything reconfirms the narrative to them. And beyond the narrative, these people have a hatred for Red America that drives them, that provides plenty of motivation. Hatred of your enemies can motivate you despite everything going to crap around you. Because there's an enemy that has to be suppressed and made fun of and humiliated at every possible turn.
One of the things there are kind of two things that I think are interesting, which is one, and Nudge Unit's right, that they're pushing the war as unifier narrative, but I don't think it's worked. The MAGA types have been extremely, anti, involvement, and a lot of them are specifically, going about it in a very kind of like Reaganite way of, criticizing the expense of it. And who knows? I don't think it's working yet. Obviously, who knows? Maybe it will, maybe it's just taking a little bit longer than I think. But to me, at least, I think that it's a pretty safe bet that things are going to become more uncomfortable, for a variety of reasons. Obviously, the level of violence, specifically in like schools and education, has gotten pretty bad. Crime is not quite as bad as it was in the 70s or 90s, but we're getting close, and increasing rapidly. And also, just kind of like the institutionalized, just like out and out, discrimination against people like you and me. And the worst part is that's probably good, not individually, right? It sucks. People are going to get hurt, and that's not what I mean at all. That's bad. You'd hope for that to be, not a possibility. But to be honest, like, I think, we as Westerners, and specifically we in Americans, have been, well, we've been, kind of fat and happy for a while. It's been all too easy to talk a big game about, kind of like the boomer waff and Fed posting. But to be honest, most people just want to watch, their kind of like rage porn YouTube videos about the gosh dang SJWs in video games, and then they go back to Buffalo Wild Wings, order a 24 plate of boneless chicken wings, and forget about it, right? Because it's so easy, it's so comfortable. And if we actually want things to change, you can't change things and be comfortable. It's kind of an either or, so to speak. And so, at least from my perspective, I think that, well, when being comfortable is no longer an option, well, it's either sink or swim, and so maybe we'll see something productive come out of that. And I think people have already been preparing. There are people, like the Beowulf Society, the Old Glory Club, the guys at Nomos who are building real things. And obviously, that's with that in mind, I think.
No, I think you mentioned a salient point there is that because the system has progressed to this point in the progressive religion, that white men are no longer allowed in these positions at all because they are the enemy. That's actually going to contribute to the regime's ultimate demise, because we're the most competent and loyal to the state. And so once you remove those cogs from the machine, it ceases to function in the long run. Yeah, they can put these Chinese copy cogs, but they're poorly made and don't last more than 5 years, with the system. Eventually, the system will just break because you just don't have the pieces anymore to make it function. So it's actually a good thing in the long run that we're barred from the system, because it contributes to the system's collapse sooner, or weakening of power at the very least. Which is a view I hold, and I think is 100% true.
And I think the other thing is that as the prosperity dries up within the system, which will not be fun, it will not be comfortable, that the kind of like the poison promise, the allure of evil will dry up with it. Not obviously 100%. There's always kind of like a dark allure to this, but I mean, let's be honest. There's an ever greater number of people for whom there is no future with the current regime, right? Like people like you and I have no role. Like there's no future offered to us by these people. Okay. I would also argue the same is the case for, Southeast Asian men, less so, but it's growing.
Increasingly so. Did you see that article where they said the Japanese are actually European? So they've actually made it official.
That's some horseshoe theory, right? I feel like that's a line from Murdoch. But incidentally, a very similar thing is happening to certain, I guess, slices of white women, right? So we saw this very much with the the whole discourse about being a Karen. There's an immense amount of social pressure against kind of traditionally minded, young women. Women who don't buy into the girl boss fantasy, who don't buy into kind of modern views on kind of sex and gender. There's, immense amount of pressure. And obviously, there's still a vast majority of people who don't care and don't notice. But as the regime, alienates more and more, good and competent people. And Charlie, over COVID spoke about this with the idea of the based draft. Right, this idea that the regime all at once gets rid of everyone who has a certain opinion, and obviously that didn't necessarily all happen. But the problem is, and we know from how these people work, that there's no tool that they gain that they only use once, right? So, for instance, the social control, the security state stuff we saw around 9/11, that never stopped. They still use that, and I think that the state of exception, first with 9/11, came back around with COVID, that's here to stay. And so, at least to me, right, I think that our enemies being awful in a weird way, helps us. The worst thing they could do is essentially, bring back a Bill Clinton, or bring back I don't even love Bill. I'm not saying I like Bill Clinton, far from it, but bring back someone like that. Bring back a Mark Warner type, someone who is, both entirely and completely a creature of the system, but still palatable to, our friends and neighbors.
No, I agree with you, but they can't do that anymore. The religion dictates to them that's not allowed. That's a major sin. You're mustache man adjacent, which is a no-no. But so as that gets reinforced more and more, increasingly you won't be allowed in anything. And more of these higher-earning groups and some other minorities will just not be allowed in society at all. I mean, like that's got to create a counterculture right there, and I think something's going to come from that. So that's something positive to think about. Whatever comes from that being.
Sorry, I've completed another square on the Jaybird bingo, which is accidentally muting yourself.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, I'm curious. What are your thoughts? Because obviously, you're in school. Your life is kind of like opening up before you. But what are your kind of plans for the future in light of this conversation?
Well, I'm still working those out, honestly. I'll probably still get the college thing, but my children won't. I think the majority of Gen Z who will have children, which is going to be the based few. However, that's probably a good thing considering the majority is pretty terrible and already corrupted with social propaganda. So I think increasingly we'll probably have to be stuck with kind of jobs society needs, like welding and things like this. Maybe when we build our own like colleges and universities, like the South Africans, there will be a place for more intellectuals like us. We'll find a place there in a friendly institution that isn't completely against us fundamentally at every level.
Yeah, I had kind of a dark thought today. So one of the things that I love about where I live is it is in kind of an anti-progressive bubble. So it really does feel like, compared to the big cities I've lived in, it feels like it feels like 2013. It feels like 2012. Before the Great Awakening. But I've started to see the tendrils. I've started to see it. Like certain institutions are changing. Signs are popping up, and I don't know. Maybe it's inevitable, but I don't know. I don't want to see it go. I think it probably is inevitable, and I understand. Like, on one side of my mouth, I'm preaching that we're going to have to get uncomfortable. And on the other side, it's like, well, why does it have to come from me?
No, I feel the same way. It's like watching your culture and heritage be destroyed right in front of you. I'm replaced with this horrific monster that takes its place, and just these absolute bio-Leninist products take hold. The Bugmen essentially replace the actual Americans that used to exist in these places, but just got ideologically captured.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that's the skin suit effect, and I think that we're going to have to be pretty realistic about this, which is that, like, in order for something new to be born, things are going to have to die. And of course, I mean that in a purely metaphorical sense, right? But I think that we're going to have to be pretty realistic about this. There's no way to do this. There's no way to change where it's, where we get all of the things that we liked before, and this is why, even though I kind of like tongue in cheek call myself a reactionary, I'm not really, because, once something is gone, it's gone, and you can remix it, but you can never bring it back. And I think that there is kind of a profound sadness in seeing things that you love, fall prey to entropy. And my point in this is not to say like, oh, it's all over, man. It's to drop a big black pill. It's just to say that, like, if we want change, we want things to be different. I think we have to be, really realistic about what that entails. And not only will it be personally uncomfortable, but there will be things lost along the way. And I think in that, obviously we've been talking kind of about like self-sacrifice and when to put your head up over the trench, that, there will be a time for that. Maybe it's not now. And I'm not saying, not today, not this hill forever, the conservative point. But I guess it's just kind of a sobering realization that that hill will come, and it won't be a bloodless battle, metaphorically.
No, these things are very tragic. Moldbug, these types will say, just become an expat in your country and watch everything, die. And like, yes, it's inevitability at this point, but that doesn't mean like it's not tragic on a deep level for those who care about our ancestors and culture, many of which my ancestors were here far before me and fought in the American Civil War before that, helped settle to make this country into the greatest nation that once existed once upon a time. And you have all these unique cultures and like subcategories that existed in the old America that will no longer exist anymore, and that's a tragic thing. And I don't think you can just brush that under the rug and say, well, it's not a big deal and just move on. That's something we have to be nostalgic, but we should recognize the tragedy that is in there for its proper place. So I feel like we have an unhealthy habit with nostalgifying these things.
No, that's true. So anyway, AP, I'm still recovering from my from my bachelor party, so I'm gonna kind of bring things to a close. But is there anything you want to say to kind of wrap this discussion up?
I would just say that like either way you look at it, we're going to ultimately win this fight. There's no reason to be black pilled. Regardless of your personal positions, we do win this fight in the end. I firmly believe that no regime stays in charge of an empire forever. They eventually all fall, and from old things that die, new things are born. So that's what I have to say about that. But on the shilling part, please, if you haven't, check out my channel, because I do try to put a lot of work into that. And it would be greatly appreciated if you could help me reach 1K this year. That would be greatly appreciated. That's shilling done so far.
Well, great. And like I said, American Populist show is pretty good. His episode with Prude, which I've, listened to most of, I quite enjoyed. And he has content with me, which is even better because, of course, I am the bleeding, the beating heart of this movement. I'm completely essential, and no one could ever forget that, right?
You're the NPR voice, the based NPR voice. That will
I was joking, but nonetheless. Anyway, as far as my links, you guys know where to find me. The show's available on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and Odyssey, as well as other audio shows. If you want to support me, well, you can head over to Axios Remote Coaching and Fitness. I will eventually get that right. We played a little ad for them, but the guy who runs it, well, he's one of us. And obviously, if you're looking to improve yourself, well, being fit, being capable is a pretty good way of doing it. If you want to support the show more directly, well, I've got links for that too. I don't expect it, but I do deeply appreciate it just to, cover the cost of the show because, when you record, roughly 4 episodes a week, turns out that your hosting costs go through the roof because you are putting out a shocking amount of content. And the advantage you get for supporting me is you get pre-recorded episodes early. So obviously, when I talk to people like, Thomas or, the British guys, we can't record at this normal time. So I record the episodes early and they go up a few days before, they hit the main feed. If you support me, again, it's not a huge thing, but it's a little way to, kind of offer you guys some utility in exchange for some cash. And anyway, guys, thank you so much for coming out. I really appreciate it. And keep your head up. The lie can't last forever. Good night.